This operator showcase is for Ethan, one of the top tier 4 stars within the game ever since the starting year. To get yourself an Ethan, just go to the purchase certificate store, spend 150 red certs, and you can get yourself a very easy to use unit. Let's show you how to do so, starting off with this stage that is DMEX4. Most players in the community will call Ethan the king of bind, and not the queen because Innes if not Chilpai exists. But as the king himself, his crowd control utility is really high. We're gonna start taking a look at his skill 2, which states that the chance to trigger his talent is increased by 2.5 times. His talent states that there's a 25% chance to bind an enemy for 3 seconds, which is a very decent amount, so if it increases by 2.5 times at skill rank 7, that would be about a 60 to 70% trigger chance. So not a full 100%, but you're gonna get some good amount of bind in that skill duration. So bind is a very powerful ability where it kind of works like stun, with the exception that enemies can still attack. So if enemies have successfully blocked someone and they are a melee attacking unit, they will continue to attack, but if the enemy is a range attacker, they will only just stop in place, but they can still attack anyone that's around them. This is pretty good on a stage like this where there are the lancers, because as you can see, the lancers are being stopped by the bind that Ethan is triggering, goes back into their initial speed. However though, when you have fast charging enemies like the lancers, you want to make sure that Ethan is able to bind them on first try, otherwise they'll just go charging through him and hitting any more of your units in the way. So the 60% to 70% chance might not be sufficient to your liking, so let's compare skill rank 7 to M3 to see what the difference is. On the left is skill rank 7 and on the right is M3. You can see that M3 allows for more enemies to be bound and there is lower chances of it leaking by. At the same time, there is a higher attack on Ethan, which means that a lot of these mobs that have a low defense, Ethan is able to wipe them more easily instead of funneling them all into Mudrock's direction. The chance of you binding an enemy at M3 is at 75% thanks to the 3 times increase instead. Now, let's compare M3 against M3 with the module. The first thing for you to observe is actually when the skills are turned off. You might have noticed that the enemies move slightly slower when the module is activated. At module level 1, there is a significant benefit which you can lower the movement speed of enemies by 20%, which is huge because it means that you'll trap the enemies more within Ethan's range. And then, the bind chance and the time is increased. So if you increase it all the way to mod 3, which is very cheap for a 4 star, it will be a 28% chance to bind an enemy and for 3.5 seconds instead of 3 seconds, which all of these together are very huge improvements for Ethan, almost making him seem like a perma-bind. I can't believe Ethan's module gives him what looks like perma-bind while Frostleaf get chance to freeze. I mean, chance to inflict cold. Thus is truly Arknights. This next stage is H71. With Ethan's mod 3 and skill M3, it means that the chance to bind an enemy with skill turned on is 85%, almost meaning always binding the enemies. So in a stage like this where there's so many enemies flooding the gates, it's great to have an Ethan to cast mass crowd control onto everyone. So it is possible for you to open up the stage with Ethan first, along with other units that requires to charge their skill. What Ethan can then do is to bind the early starting enemies so that your units have the time to charge their abilities. Like for instance here, I've placed a Taunts, which I'm trying to get his infinite skill, but he isn't that strong without that skill turned on. So Ethan can help to lower the pressure by having his skill turned on first, binding the enemies, letting Taunts do his hits, and also just downing the HP of all of the enemies around. So this is a fantastic way to open up on this stage. And you might think of Ethan's bind very similar to Suzerain's slow, where Ethan is able to cast massive bind onto all the enemies, while Suzerain is able to do the massive slow. It's still different in the sense that Suzerain has more utility, like being able to heal and being able to do a big amount of fragile, but even so, the role of just slowing the enemies down are basically the same. So what you could do is to interchange their skills, meaning you don't turn both of them on at the same time, but rather, you use Ethan's skill first. When Ethan's skill ends, you can then consider to cast Suzerain's slow. So that means you're doing a huge amount of utility. As soon as Suzerain's slow ends, you can then recast Ethan's bind again. That allows for this huge trap part of the map onto all of the enemies. As you're watching this H71 being played, you would also realize that the only possible healing source is actually from Suzerain, and Ethan is somehow surviving all those casters and snipers hitting at him. The reason for that is his trait. So as an ambusher, he has a trait that states that he can dodge attacks, both physical and arts, for 50%. It is a gamble, and somehow the gamble paid off while I was filming this video, because you can see how Ethan is surviving at just a small amount of health until the point that Suzerain is able to heal him. So that just shows you how fantastic this 4-star actually is. This operator showcase isn't complete if we don't talk about Ethan's skill 1. You remember back in Invitation to Wine that this was a crucial skill that helped a lot of us succeed in the event. The reason for that is that skill 1 works like a poison damage. It states that it hits target with an additional 70 arts damage on skill rank 7 for 4 seconds, and this is a tick damage. So it's very similar to Blue Poison and Taunts on their talent, with the exception that this is a passive skill that Ethan has that is infinite all throughout when you deploy him. This is a wonderful skill for the fact that it has a very good range, it's AoE, and it allows you to get rid of so many things at once. So as you're watching right now, the fireballs that goes into the Sui boss himself, that is eliminated by Ethan from the very start of the stage, and if you see later on when the regular mobs start to spawn, as soon as Taunts kills them, they spawn out with all of those blocks that requires a number of hits, but Ethan is able to clear them out thanks to the very first skill that he has. This skill is wonderful for other reasons. If let's say you have towers like mountain passes that you see in RA that requires a number of hits, poison damage is very good against them. So using someone like Ethan is going to be good over there. Or if let's say you have turrets that you want to charge, like for example if you have a stainless, which stainless turrets requires a certain number of hits, the poison damage is actually effective onto the turret. So you can do so by placing stainless followed by the turret, and then Ethan right in front of the turret so that he can cast the bind. At the same time, he's also able to charge out the turret. So these are some creative uses as to how you might want to use Ethan. Let's answer some closing questions. Should you get yourself an Ethan? Yes, definitely. He is very cheap and easy to build. Do you need to E2 Ethan? Not necessarily. As you can see, you could enjoy him just for the poison ability even at E0. But I will strongly suggest that you actually E2 him, because does he deserve an E2? Yes, of course. He is clearly very powerful for a 4-star. Which skill should you give Mastery 3 to? You could ignore skill 1 unless you really want to, but skill 2 is obviously the way to go. And should you give him a mod 3? Absolutely. Such a wonderful module for a 4-star, and that's kind of rare to see. You could enjoy this 4-star very soon in integrated strategies, because trust me, IS5 is gonna want it so much. So in any case, I hope this has taught you guys how to go loving your own Ethan, and I also hope this was a fantastic operator showcase for you to watch. I'll see you guys in many more to come. Bye bye.